everyone, and welcome to Pale Blue Pod, the astronomy podcast for people who are overwhelmed by the universe but still want to be its friend. I'm your host, Dr. Moiya McTier. I'm an astrophysicist, a folklorist, and a good friend to the universe. I definitely invited it to my next birthday party. And I am recording today's episode from my office here at Pale Blue Podiversity, and I'm expecting a stellar guest. AJ Link is a space law expert who teaches space law at Howard University's law school. He also does a lot of other things. Hopefully he'll tell us about some of them, and I'm honored that he took time from his busy schedule to stop by my office today. I actually think I hear someone walking down the hall now. AJ, welcome. Come on in.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. I'm really excited to learn about space law today and get kind of like a little primer on the field. But before that, is there anything else you would want the listeners to really know about you before we dive in?
I don't think so. I like hanging out. I like books. I like my dogs.
Love.
Terrible at these kinds of questions, so they can know that about me.
That's also a valuable piece of information. And I, too, am terrible at these questions. I think maybe it's the least fair thing I do when I have guests on the show is like ask them these get-to-know-you questions that would terrify me if I was asked. But we can just hop right into getting to know you a little bit better. I have 5 questions here, and I think by the end we will have really drilled into the core of who you are as a being, a human being. So the first question is, when you think about the vastness of the universe out there, how does it make you feel?
Extremely calm and at peace.
Oh, I love that. Do you know why that's your reaction? Because a lot of people don't have that reaction.
I think because I've been fascinated by space for so long and working in space and around space. It's the grandiosity of the universe has, become really normalized to me. One of the exercises I do in class and with other people when I'm working on other projects for people who are outside of space is showing them a video of the scale of planets in the universe compared to human beings. And I think that vastness and just understanding that I'm so small and tiny and insignificant is really calming in a way. There are like so many terms, but it's like positive nihilism or some shit like that. Yeah, like I'm insignificant. It doesn't matter. That's just really calming to me. A lot of people feel the weight of the world or all these pressures of day-to-day life, society, capitalism. But for me, it's like, man, we are really, really tiny just floating out here. So for me, that's really calming, and it gives me perspective, especially when life can get overwhelming or frustrating. You kind of think about it like we're really insignificant, so maybe just tone it back and that's okay. So it's really calming for me.
Yes, I have a very similar reaction, and I think it comes from a similar place of familiarity with space. You know, after spending a decade thinking about it every day and making it less spooky and less mysterious, I'm less scared by it. Awesome. The next question is a little bit further away from home, emotionally maybe. Do you have a favorite unit of measurement?
I think right now my favorite unit of measurement is words spoken by my child.
I'm obsessed. Yes. How many words are you up to now?
So we do lots of languages. We do English, Spanish, Italian, and sign language.
Oh,
but
nice.
We only communicate in English and sign language, but we understand words across all 4 languages. So I couldn't tell you. I would say probably over 50 words we understand, but we only speak maybe 10 or so. That's
so cool. It must be so cute to see the signs in like a little kid's hands.
Yeah. Our favorite sign right now is more, for sure. We haven't gotten to please yet. We're working on it. Working on more please. But this is the baby sign for more. Yeah.
It changes as people grow up?
Yeah. So baby sign language isn't the same as ASL. There's crossover and things are similar, but it's not the same.
That is fascinating. And for listeners at home, the baby sign for more looks like you take your hands and they're kissing. It's little kissing hands. That's so cute. Give me more, please. Oh, but not please yet.
Yeah, we're working on
Please
please.
soon. Oh, I love that so much. Okay, take the next question with however many grains of salt you wish. Do you feel like your astrology sign, your sun sign, matches your personality?
I don't know. I'm not super invested in astrology. I think a lot of people in my life who are into astrology say that I very much act like a Sagittarius. But again, that's just the sun sign, right? They don't know the rest of my chart.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm one of those people who's really nerdy and technical, and it's like the position of the stars is different now than when they first did the astrology signs. So like, am I even really a Sagittarius based on the year I was born and where the stars were? Probably not. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's this other sign now, so everything's shifted and there's tension in the astrology community. Like, do we do the old system or the new system?
I didn't even know there was a new sign. What's the name of the new sign?
It's called Ophiuchus, and
that sounds awful.
It's the snake wrangler, which is actually pretty interesting. It's the only so the constellation Ophiuchus splits the only non-contiguous constellation in the sky. So there's the snake constellation that Ophiuchus is wrangling, and there's like the left snake, and then Ophiuchus, and then the right snake. It like splits them into two, but it's the same constellation.
And when are you born to be an Ophiuchus?
That's a great question. I cannot remember, but it's like a lot of people's signs, especially if you're on the cusp of one sign versus another, has shifted. So most people are now reassigned to different signs.
Oh, I'll have to check that out. I have no idea about that. How new of a development is that?
In the last like few decades.
Oh, a few decades? I've never heard of this. So I am uneducated.
I think astronomically, the shift, the precession of the Earth that made Ophiuchus come into the path of the ecliptic, I think that happened, in the last few hundred years, but people started talking about it in the last few decades.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Not that it actually has any physical or technical bearing on who we are as people, but it is fun to talk about.
For some people, it does, though.
The placebo effect is very, very strong.
I won't call it a placebo effect. I won't judge individuals that way.
That's fair. I say this with no judgment. I love talking about astrology. I think it's a good proxy. I think it's a good, shorthand for talking about ourselves as people, but it's not like the stars actually tug on you in special ways depending on where they are when you're born. But yeah, I hope that you enjoy your journey on learning about Ophiuchus because it's cool stuff. The next question is, what event in space would you most like to witness if you could safely do so from our Pale Blue Pod time and space transport machine?
The event horizon of a black hole, easily.
Sick. Yeah. Yeah, we can send you there. You can see things being spaghettified. What big questions do you have there?
I don't think I have questions. I just want to experience and enjoy. I think a close second would be the surface of the sun, but definitely the event horizon of a black hole, just to experience that thing, right? I would, if it wasn't incredibly painful, I think that would be a pretty cool way to die too. Or I guess not die, because technically we don't know what happens at the end. I'm pretty sure it's death, right? The crushing weight of infinite gravity on you.
Right. It's death, but it lasts forever. It's like you're stuck in that moment of death for eternity.
So yeah, I definitely want to experience that.
Awesome. Well, you'll be very safe in our transport machine. We just had it inspected, so it's good to go. And imagine we are sending you out in the transport machine. We're launching you into space so you can see that event horizon. What song would you like to be playing during your blast off?
I guess it depends. My favorite song in the world is Cornbread and Butter Beans by the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And I love that. And it brings me joy and peace and tranquility. But if my wife was going to be at the launch, because she definitely doesn't want to come and she has no desire to be in space and she hates that I love space and would go to space in a heartbeat and leave her, I would maybe pick one of our songs, which is either Forever You and Me by the Teskey Brothers or Carry You by the Teskey Brothers.
Oh, That's sweet. A lasting message as you like zoom off into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing yourself. Thank you for sharing your answers. I feel like I know you a little bit better. I feel like the listeners know you a little bit better. So now we can, trust what you say. Not that we didn't before, about space law, which is the whole topic of the episode. I'm curious how you got into space law, because it's not like it's one of those fields that you see in TV shows.
Yeah. So I wanted to do space for a long time, and I just could never find the right path. I couldn't be an astronaut. I couldn't be an astrophysicist. I didn't like planetary science. So when I went to law school, I had kind of given up on that a little bit or pushed that to the side. But one of the first days at law school, you get to go around and it's like club day sign up. I don't know. So I was just fortunate enough to go to a law school that had a space law club and a space law class. I was like, this seems cool. It seems like what I want to do. And I was just really fortunate to be in a place that introduced me to that. Normally you're not, and it's changing a little bit now, but when I started law school, people weren't really talking about space law. It's not something that was in the general consciousness. It's a little bit now when you talk about space policy, especially in the US, not actual space law, but there's a lot of overlap. So yeah, I just was really fortunate to go to a law school that had a space law club and a space law class.
Very cool. And it sounds like there aren't many of those.
There are more now. I used to keep track of them, but there are definitely a handful of schools now that have at least a space law class. And a lot of them have space law clubs too. Usually the clubs come before the class because the students have to show interest in it before the school offers the class. But yeah.
Of course, they're like, we're not going to invest the resources unless we know that they'll be used.
Invest the resources is a strong word. I mean, they just pay the adjunct professor to teach the class. So yeah,
I know, but that's absolutely how universities are thinking about it. I'm glad that Fortune smiled down on you and sent you to one of those schools. You said something about space policy being different from space law. What's the difference there?
One that's not really important. Oftentimes you'll see them grouped together. So space law and policy, space policy and law. Yeah. But space policy, I would say, is more the day-to-day work of technically what can people do or not do, the checks, the regulations and all that, which that policy falls under space law, right? Because it's codified, or most of it is codified. So it's space law, but it's more of like the day-to-day stuff rather than the overarching law.
Okay. I think that makes sense. I don't really know how like law works even on Earth in the Earth context. So putting it above the atmosphere just makes it extra confusing to me, at least. I read an article that you wrote where you said that space law has been around for more than 60 years, which, if I do the math right, makes it seem like it came around at the same time as NASA. Did they grow together, the space program and the space law movement?
I wouldn't say they grew together. Space law has existed since at least Sputnik was launched. You can argue with historians and things like that about conceptualizing what space law would be like before Sputnik launched. And then this idea that when Sputnik was launched and no one shot it down, Sputnik was a Soviet satellite. And no one shot it down. That created customary space law where once you reach a certain threshold, you're no longer in territorial airspace. If you want to get into air law, which I don't.
Air and space law separate.
Yeah, air and space law are two separate things.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So at least since 1950, I always get the date wrong. I think Sputnik was 54, maybe. There's been conceptualizations of space law, and then you get space law treaties, which happen throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And while that coincides with NASA, NASA is existing from a U.S. perspective with U.S. goals and intentions in mind. So when the U.S. is at the United Nations, at the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is UN COPUOS, and they're talking about these treaties, there's 5 main treaties. They are thinking about U.S. interests, which NASA represents, but NASA isn't necessarily growing with space law. It's more like the US has ideas that it wants to do with NASA, and the US takes those ideas and you communicate what treaties they agree with or don't agree with, what the treaties should say and won't say, what treaties they will sign on to and won't sign on to, and things like that. So they exist in parallel, but I would say that they did not do it together.
Okay. That's probably good. I've talked before about the, kind of military origins of NASA, and I'm glad that there is some separation there. From how you described it, it almost seemed like there's some great international council that dictates space law. You said NASA goes to them. Who is deciding these laws? Because who owns space?
So no one owns space. If you look at the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, it says that no state can appropriate territory in space. You can't own space.
Nice.
Currently, there's this huge push for space resources, space minerals, all this stuff, where it's saying you can own pieces of space or parts of planets and things like that, but only in a really small private property kind of way, not a real property and territorial kind of way. So I would say that at the United Nations, they don't dictate space law, but like other places within the United Nations or other committees within the United Nations, that is where people go to deliberate topics and to try to find solutions and compromises for how space activities should exist. And so what we've seen over the past couple of decades is there's not a ton of consensus. So COPUOS operates on this thing called consensus, which just means if something is to be passed or done or whatever, everyone has to agree or no one can object. And so because so many countries have different priorities within space, you rarely see consensus come out of COPUOS on major issues. And so COPUOS is a deliberative body and an international body for collaboration, but I would say it doesn't dictate space law. So what's happened is with the international treaties, which are international law, the countries that have signed and assented to those treaties are bound by them. Bound by international law doesn't really mean much, but theoretically they're bound by them. So what happens is they create their own national laws to be in accordance with the treaties. So that's where you get more into the policy side. So the US has a ton of national space laws and policies that theoretically has them in line with the international space law treaties and other documents.
That really helped me get a bird's eye view of the picture. That really helped. Thank you. Hey there, it's me. AJ started playing with this prism I had resting on a bookshelf, and I thought it was just a regular glass prism, but then he focused some of its light on my desk chair, and it actually turned rainbow patterns, so that's cool. He's playing with that, and I'm going to take these few precious, weird moments, happy Pride, y'all, to share some messages with you. The first message goes out to all of my patrons. As an independent podcaster, it would be so hard to make this show without you. Thank you so much. I also want to give a huge thank you and a special shout out to my sun-like stars, Scott Reynolds, Tom T, Nicole Bartlett, and Ashley Shambo. I hope your hydrogen is baking into some yummy helium for you to snack on later. If you would like to support this indie podcast on Patreon, hear your name on the show, make it onto my patron star chart, and get research notes for most episodes for just $5 a month, you can do that by joining at patreon.com/palebluepod. You can also make a one-time donation as a supernova, become a bright point in the sky at the PayPal link in this episode's description. And if you can't support the show financially, that's fine. I understand, and you are still space. The best way to help the show grow is actually to get more people listening to Pale Blue Pod. So if you can take a link to an episode that you really love and share it with some people in your life, get more people to befriend the universe and be a part of Pale Blue Pod, that is something I would truly appreciate. Thank you in advance. My next message is a podcast recommendation. It's another show in the Multitude Collective, and it's one of my personal favorites. It's called Spirits. This is a history and comedy podcast focused on everything folklore, mythology, and the occult, told through the lens of feminism, queerness, and modern adulthood. Every week, mythology buff Julia and her childhood best friend Amanda get together to learn about a different story from mythology and folklore over drinks. You get it? Spirits. They're talking about spooky ghost stuff, and there's drinks involved. I love a pun. They talk about everything from the mythological origins of major franchises like Lord of the Rings and Wonder Woman to modern urban legends that listeners send into them, all the way to a roundup of werewolf stories from around the world. They've released more than 400 episodes over the last 7 years. They're truly podcast goals. So there's so much to enjoy, whether you're here for analyses of mental health and mythology or creepy modern ghost stories. You can dive in at spiritspodcast.com or search for Spirits wherever you download your podcasts. And I'm truly loving their Egyptian mythology series where they go over a different god in the Egyptian pantheon. So check it out. That's Spirits wherever you download your podcasts. All right, my desk chair does seem to be fading back into its normal red color. I guess the prism's effects are temporary. So AJ's going to put that down, and we're going to get back to this conversation about space law. I'm wondering what types of things fall under the purview of space law. Now that we've distinguished space law from air law, I also know tree law is a big thing. So, like, specifically in space law, what types of things are regulated? For example, does it say who is allowed to take things into space?
Yeah. I would say, so when people ask me what is space law, I say it's the law that governs outer space. And it's not just in space, but those are things like launches. Those are things like payloads on launches. So launch vehicles are different than payloads. For those who aren't in the industry, no one cares, right?
I care. Wait, so they say like what kinds of payloads can go on launches?
Yeah. And how you're supposed to register those payloads, how you're supposed to get those payloads approved, cleared, things like that. So sometimes people put illegal payloads on spaceships. So one of the famous instances is this private company put a bunch of tardigrades illegally on a ship and took them to the moon, which there's this thing called forward and backwards contamination where you're not supposed to contaminate non-Earth environments. So like, yeah, you have to register your payloads. You have to check all those things. You have to get your launches approved, right? You have to get licenses when you're talking about satellites. You have to get FCC approval, telecommunications approvals, things like that. Okay. We talk about air law and space law being separate, but the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, governs some space policy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right? You have to go through the air to get to space. Yeah.
Yeah. So the FAA, the FCC, NOAA, there are lots of different organizations or administrative agencies that are involved in space law, but it governs all that stuff.
Oh, very cool. I am glad that not just anyone can launch stuff up into space without telling official people. I know there's definitely corruption there. Like, I'm sure it's not a perfect system, but I'm glad there are at least some checks and balances. Because I, before today, thought that if you had enough money, you could just launch something into space yourself.
You could. It would be illegal, though, and you would probably face a lot of fines. What we will start to see, and this has kind of been a conversation, is that once people do start to amount certain amounts of wealth, they might be building their own platforms outside of the U.S. So if you launch from outside the U.S., depending on your launch vehicle, where it's registered, your payloads, you may or may not be governed by U.S. space law. And that could be a problem if rich people decide to start launching from, other places.
Mm-hmm. Other places, especially ones that didn't sign on to those treaties, right?
Or sign on to those treaties but don't have national laws to help enforce them.
Okay, interesting. Does space law set the laws on like the International Space Station or other stations that are up in space?
So for the International Space Station, there's an actual treaty. There's an International Space Station treaty with a code of conduct. And so that is technically space law, but it's not one of the major space law treaties at the international level. only because the International Space Station was a multilateral agreement between a few countries, not between
Mm-hmm.
like the international community. So like not everyone has access to the International Space Station. I don't think a lot of people know that, right? Not every country has access to it.
Right.
If you want access to it, you have to negotiate the treaty, all these things. Your astronauts have to abide by the code of conduct, all this stuff. So yes, there is space law that governs the International Space Station, but it's not one of the five major treaties.
Okay.
I guess the
Interesting.
major treaties do govern it, but like the actual actions on the space station are governed by a different treaty.
Yeah, a different treaty. And I imagine that all of the countries that are part of that collaboration, they would have negotiated to have laws be like similar to their laws on land.
Yes. So depending on which part of the International Space Station you are in and who you
Oh,
are in terms of your citizenship, different laws and jurisdiction applies. So like if you are on the Russian part of it, you're under Russian jurisdiction, even if you're a US citizen. Like obviously there's like international stuff and diplomats and all that that work this stuff out, but like the jurisdictions are different.
Okay. Okay. Don't be gay on the Russian side of the International Space Station. Got it. Got it. Happy Pride. Um, you you mentioned earlier this tardigrade payload and this deal about contamination, which reminded me of all of those telescopes that we have sent like crashing onto the surfaces of like Saturn and stuff, like the Cassini spacecraft. Is that part of that treaty where we intentionally destroy spacecraft so that we don't contaminate things?
I think that's an interesting interpretation. Usually, and this is in, I want to say, Article 9 of the Outer Space Treaty, when it talks about due regard and contamination, they're talking about biological contamination. So
Mm-hmm.
human beings have desecrated the moon with all types of litter and trash. And part of that trash is like human waste and filth. But generally, what they're talking about is basically like invasive exotics for space, right? Going and taking biological materials or samples from Earth or from a different celestial body and bringing them back without being sterile about it. So when
Mm-hmm.
we bring stuff back, it's like really sterile. Like they're really careful with it. They do all this stuff to make sure it's not introduced into Earth's native environments. So I would say it's super duper wrong for us to crash telescopes and stuff onto other celestial bodies. But I would say legally, from a space law standpoint, most countries agree that it's okay to do that.
Yeah, I think what I remember hearing about the Cassini craft specifically was sending it down into Saturn instead of on any of the solid moons would decrease the chances of like maybe going to one of those moons in the future, seeing some signs of life and having to worry that it was microbes from Earth that started that process. But I see now also like the junk of the spacecraft is like also a type of contamination too. Interesting. Has anyone ever been convicted of a crime up in space that you know of?
No, there was a story a couple years ago of this astronaut who allegedly hacked into her ex-wife's bank account from space, but that turned out to be not a true story.
Oh, I love lesbian
That was
drama.
like a there's a misunderstanding, but yeah.
Okay, well then I need someone to write that story right now. I need lesbian drama in space in my inbox. Post haste, please. um, so you teach space law. You presumably get to see people's reactions to hearing this stuff for the first time often. Is there any part of space law that your students tend to find particularly interesting or like counterintuitive, maybe?
I think just the existence of space law and understanding that it's real and not theoretical and that it exists, and that it has existed, and that it's pretty far reaching and intricate. I think that's the main thing. As far as different components of space law, students react differently to the things they care or don't care about. And so
Mm.
those kinds of reactions aren't as, I guess, noticeable as oh, wow, space law is a real thing and not just science fiction.
Yeah. Do most of the people taking your class intend to go into space law?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Most of the people taking my class are looking for an easy class to finish out before they graduate or to get a break in their semester from typical
Mm.
law school classes.
People always think the space stuff is going to be easy. Why? Why is that?
Because the former students tell them that my class is easy. That's why.
Got
Uh,
it. Got it. So it's like an elective.
Yeah, I hope that one day more students take the class because they want to pursue a career in space. But I would say since I've started teaching the class, maybe a handful, like five or less, are actually interested in pursuing a career in space law, which is fine. I just want to introduce the students to it. But hopefully one day more students will pursue it as a career because we need more people who are doing it.
Also, in like the super sci-fi imagination of the future, maybe regular lawyers will have to be more familiar with space law because it'll, like butt up against their work more often.
Yeah, that's
Perhaps
definitely
that's like in the Jetsons.
That's definitely something that's happening right now. What you're seeing is a lot of firms are creating space law practices and starting up space law practices. They're also doing broader technology practice groups and artificial intelligence and all that. But you're seeing that lawyers are having to learn after law school about space and space regulations and things like that. So that is happening already.
Okay, interesting. Maybe they'll go back and like have to get a space law certificate or something. But for the people who have chosen to make space law their thing, what's that community like? Are there many of you?
I would say it's growing. Define many. I know maybe 50 or 60 people who do space law specifically.
Oh, that's tiny.
Yeah, but there are more, right? Those are just the people I know. There are lots of lawyers who are doing space law who maybe don't consider themselves space lawyers. There are lawyers who work on satellites or space contracts or contracts for space companies. Like that would technically be space law, but they probably don't view themselves as space lawyers. So I would say the intentional space law community, or people who intentionally identify or self-identify as space lawyers, is relatively small, right? There are probably a couple hundred of us around the world.
Wow. And I thought the astronomy field was small.
The space lawyer community is probably smaller than the astronomy community. Like, I don't know how many people are part of the International Society of Space Law, or what, ISLL, or I don't know. There's some International Society of Space Law that I never pay my dues to. Um, yeah, couple hundred maybe.
Wow. Well, I hope that grows. Maybe as more schools have these space law clubs and programs, that will improve. I am guessing that those few hundred people kind of look like the old guard of lawyers. I'm guessing it's not a very diverse group yet because it's like hard to access.
Yes and no. I think because space law is so international, you see the international community reflected within
Good.
the smaller space law community. However, the prominent figures and the people who are looked at as experts, or who get a lot of the speaking gigs or talks, or the people who are interviewed the most, or like if media outlets want to do some space law coverage and go to certain people, that group of people is not very representative. But I would say the community as a whole is fairly reflective. And what you're seeing as more and more people join is you're getting more people from the global south who are doing space law and bringing their perspectives from their communities, their countries into space law.
I love that. From our conversation, I'm going to guess that like where we put telescopes on land has nothing to do with space law.
I would disagree.
Really?
But only
Okay.
because I approach space law from a more holistic standpoint and understanding and ethics. And so I do think that the colonization via telescopes is something that the space law community should grapple with more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where I was going with it. Like, someone needs to grapple with it, because especially you saying that more people from the global south are getting into the field, that made me really happy, because I know that putting telescopes on land in the southern hemisphere is very popular for astronomers, but not necessarily for people who live in those spaces. It would be good to have more advocates in law from those places who could, protect their space. When you look at the things that space law covers, do you see any gaps? Or do you see any gaps becoming an issue in the future as technology improves?
Yeah, I think that's part of why I'm really excited about space law. So my focus within space law specifically is human rights, which was/is a gap in terms of the conversations that people are having. And I think this is kind of where telescopes and stealing people's land comes in, is the human rights lens of space activity, and how space activity is not always beneficial, not always benign. Something that I work on currently as part of the Palestine Space Institute is how space technology and space weapons and space rockets are used to kill and slaughter people and contribute to genocide. I know we talked about NASA at the beginning, but a lot of people don't know that. You're talking about NASA's history. NASA was started by Nazis. If not started by Nazis, Nazis had a very, very large impact on the beginnings of NASA and the U.S. rocket program.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
That's why there's so much German culture in Huntsville, Alabama. And so I think grappling with that history, but also the current context and the future context is really important. So human rights is an easy gap. I think sustainability is a buzzword that's popping around a lot, but there's still a gap in terms of how space technology can be used in a sustainable way, but also can create a more sustainable future in society and what that means.
Is that like pollution from launches or the data centers, or like what part of sustainability?
I think it's all of that.
Yeah.
I think it's all of that. It's not just the materials, but it's how the materials are mined, where they're mined from, who's exploited in terms of building those materials. Who's benefiting from whatever benefits we're getting from space technologies or even space resources in the future. How is that wealth being distributed? So not just the societal benefits of new technology or new resources, but monetarily, how are we redistributing that wealth so that it's sustainable and that, we're not creating more severe wealth inequality, which in itself leads to insustainability of human fabric of society.
Yeah. Very true, especially when we're talking about mining asteroids and stuff out in space. Who's really going to bear the brunt of all the labor that's going to potentially take, and who is going to reap the benefits of that, are real questions that should be asked and answered before people start mining them.
Yes, you would hope.
Hopefully. I'm not optimistic, but hopefully. Okay, so human rights, sustainability, for sure things that we want to have right in the space law code.
Yeah, and workers' rights is another one. I think health rights, health concerns as people stay in space longer, because right now, most of the time it's really short term, unless you get stuck up there like the people who recently came back did. But the long-term health impacts of space, what's that like? We live in a country where people aren't guaranteed health care. As more and more private companies are sending people up to space, what are the health implications of that? Do people deserve, I would say yes, free healthcare for working and living in space? Not everyone agrees on those things. So, yeah.
I mean, those astronauts who were stuck up there, they didn't even get bonus pay. They got $5 extra a day for hazard pay. We are not taking care of astronauts even now. I can't imagine we're going to do much better when they're up there longer.
Yeah. And that's a gap that people should try to fix. Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to share about your work with the human rights in space law intersection?
I hope more people choose to be interested in it because I am a terrible academic. I'm a terrible writer. I don't publish enough. I don't put enough work product out into the world for the conversations to happen. So I would love for more people to care about it and to bring their ideas and their thoughts into the realm of human rights and space law and produce work that furthers the conversation in a way that I can't do.
Love the self-awareness there. Well, let's talk about it. For other people to get into space law so they can put out this information, do you have any advice for them to do that?
I would say Google search, but Google search is deteriorating quickly, and they force AI down all the searches.
Yes. If you do Google search, just ignore the AI overview at the top, like scroll down a little.
Yeah, you can actually put in the prompt -AI at the end of your search to erase that, which Google doesn't allow a setting for you to just turn it off completely. There's a way to navigate it in Chrome where you can prevent it. Anyway, I think the Wikipedia page for space law is a great start, honestly. And if you're a good researcher, you can find my name on the space law Wikipedia page as a citation, which I'm really proud of. Yeah, I would say going there and then figuring out kind of what you like, not within space, but kind of what your passion is, especially if you're a lawyer or a potential law student, and then figuring out how that fits in the space. So like space law and environmentalism is a thing. I know people who work on environmental space law, which is really cool. Not something I'm good at, just something I'm aware of. You can talk about corporate law and corporations and their influence on policy and rulemaking, which is another thing. So I would say instead of being like, space law is so cool, which it is, totally is, jump right in. I would say like, what do you really like? What do you really care about? And seeing how and if that fits into space law and being creative that way. And then once you do that, you can look at which schools have space law as a class. You can look at the schools that have space law programs, even though those are very few. And people can hit me up too. I will send them book recommendations. I have tons of space law textbooks, more than a normal person has. I've got like 6 different space law textbooks for whatever reason. I don't make my students read all 6 cover to cover. I just pull different things from different people because it's good to have different perspectives from different editors and contributors about how they view a certain aspect of it. But yeah, Wikipedia, hit me up, find the space law textbooks, I guess, are the 3 big things.
Okay, that makes sense. How much about space do you think a space lawyer should know?
Should know?
Yeah, do you need to know?
Yeah, it's totally different, right? So I have a solid understanding of astrophysics, planetary science, some geoscience stuff, and some astronomy stuff. I probably don't need all that, but it's helpful. I also have a little bit of technical knowledge on like the satellite side and the launch side and the physics of that, but not a whole lot. So I would say that my knowledge is definitely more theoretical than practical, but it doesn't matter. I think it's just helpful to kind of understand as you're thinking about the way these things work, what's going on. So having a basic astronomy knowledge of the Earth's atmosphere and different orbits is helpful when thinking about how convoluted or populated Earth orbits are. So Earth orbits are very populated, but at the same time, very populated is relative because orbits are massive, even though they're like really small compared to the rest of the solar system. So Earth's orbit being very populated doesn't mean that it's completely crowded and there's no space. It just means that there's more stuff up there than is helpful long term, I guess. So
what a diplomatic way to put that.
I think having that kind of knowledge basis is helpful to have the conversations, especially when we're talking about what laws are needed or missing or need to be changed, but I don't think it's necessary.
Okay, good to know. That was all of my questions. Is there anything else about space law, like a little nugget of space law wisdom burning a hole in your pocket that you want to share?
Yeah, I think space law impacts all of us, whether or not people care. Oftentimes you'll get people who are like, it's bigger than me, it's beyond me, it doesn't impact me, when it most certainly does and most certainly will. And so even if you don't like space law or want to do it or pursue it, I think it's important to be aware of its existence and the consequences of people making decisions within its realm.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. So in the future, when space law decisions are in the news and I'm very confused, I will reach out to you and ask some questions because I want to be aware of it.
Hopefully I can answer them and not be wrong.
You've answered all my questions today. So no, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your perspective. I'd love for you to brag about yourself for a moment. I know that I only listed like a couple of things you do at the top of the episode. What do you want listeners to know about your work, and where can we find it online?
I would say that my work is only a really, really small part of the movement to create a better future within the space community, not just space law, but the broader space community. And that has so many incredible people that I have learned from and been lucky to collaborate with. And so I would say that my work is very minuscule in terms of impact. And there are so many other better people that you should be looking to. People can find my work all over the internet. I think they just have to, again, use the terrible Google search, or even worse, Bing search or whatever. DuckDuckGo. We'll promote DuckDuckGo.
Ask Jeeves, man.
I don't even know. I know that Jeeves.com is still a website, but I don't know if it's still a search engine. I haven't been on Jeeves in a while. Yeah. But anyway, just AJ Link Space Law, some stuff will come up, or just, I guess, AJ Link in general. You'll get painters, but also I'm working on my SEO, so we'll overcome those paint companies who pay for their love on the search engines.
Thanks. Yes, I thank my parents every day for a very SEO-able name. I don't really have to think about it.
Yeah.
Any links you want to share?
No.
Okay,
People can find me on the internet. I'm on socials, some places. If you want to find me, you have to put the effort in. But if you do put the effort in, I'm more than happy to talk and be pals.
I love that. Do some work and you'll be rewarded. All right. AJ, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I am more knowledgeable and I think maybe a little bit more intimidated about and by space law than I was an hour ago. So thank you. And not thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry. Space law shouldn't be intimidating. I think more people should, honestly, I know it's over, but I think more people should honestly grapple with how large space is. I think a lot of people actually need that kind of humility and humbling, and it would fix not all, but a lot of the problems we face today with people considering themselves to be over important.
Agreed. Big agree. And that is the note that I want to end on. Yeah. So listeners, no matter how important you think you are space. Pale Blue Pod is hosted by me, Dr. Moiya McTier, aka the universe's bestie. I created the show with original co-host Corinne Caputo, a comedienne extraordinaire, and help from the Multitude Productions team. Our theme music is by Evan Johnston, and our cover art is by Shay McMullen, and our audio editing is handled by the incomparable Misha Stanton. I am Go Astro Mo everywhere online, and you can stay in touch with the show and the universe by following Pale Blue Pod on Instagram or checking out our website, palebluepod.com. We are a member of Multitude, an independent podcast collective and production studio. So if you like Pale Blue Pod, you will love the other shows that live at multitude.productions. And if you want a shout out on the show and research notes for every episode, you can join our community over at patreon.com/palebluepod for just about $1 per episode. Thank you so much for listening to Pale Blue Pod. I'll be back next week. Bye.